Welcome in the latest episode of the Five on the Floor podcast on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Make sure to check out all of our companion content. That's our podcast, our YouTube feed, also our columns, our stories, our merchandise. Got to get that Tua shirt before the draft. You can find all of it at 5reasonsports.com. That's 5reasonsports.com. Make sure you check it out. Also, check out all of our new sponsors. We added a bunch of sponsors in the past 3 weeks. They believe in us. We believe in them. So please support them. And all of them are based here in South Florida, and they're South Florida sports fans. That's where our sponsors come from, including our friend Courtney Harris. And he introduced to me Christopher's Bakery and actually made an order of it. I think it's going to be here this Wednesday or Thursday to keep me company during this crisis. Where can you find Christopher's Bakery? Go to christophersbakery.com/5 reasons. Spell it out with the FIVE reasons, and then type in the code, the number 5 reasons. And if you do that, you'll get 15% off your order. Their signature product is a vanilla wafer cake. I actually added some chocolate chips to that. And that was created by Courtney's father over 30 years ago. Why is it called Christopher's Bakery? It's actually a great cause. It's named after his brother who died from a seizure at just 11 years old. And so Christopher's Bakery has partnered with Miami Nicholas Children's Hospital to set up a fund where they donate a portion of all the sales to epilepsy neuroscience research, since that's where they spent much of that young man's life. They also ship across the entire country, but they do hand deliver here in South Florida once the crisis passes. For now, order and it will get to your door. So again, I'm looking forward to this getting here this week, and you should check it out too. You can follow them at Nilla Wafers. That's at Nilla Wafer Cakes on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And now, today's episode.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a Miami Heat and NBA podcast from Ethan Skolnick with Alphonse Sidney, a.k.a. Alf954. Brought to you by the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, Ethan Skolnick back here. No Alphonse Sidney. As we're recording this, it is his birthday. So he's knee-deep in some kind of alcoholic beverage. If you didn't check it out, on Friday we had our latest episode of 5 Reasons to Drink, where our next guest was actually making an appearance. And today was Alphonse's birthday, and I knew there was no chance he'd be here. Alex Lito also cannot make it. He's going to be on another episode with me. So I reached across the aisle. To our mortal enemies over at 3 yards per carry. It's 5 on the Floor, 3 yards per carry, and 5 Rings Canes, kind of the standard bearers of the network. And I reached across to our friend and enemy, Alfredo Arteaga, the other Alf in the network. You can check out his work on 5reasonsports.com, and of course, as one of the hosts of the 3 yards per carry podcast. But what a lot of people don't know, and you haven't been on a pod with me in a long time, I mean, I've been on 3 yards a couple times, is you're a big Heat fan.
Yeah.
And you're a Pat Riley file, essentially. Probably more than anybody else in the entire network. And so since we're doing all
current customer, so
yes, and a current customer, that's also true. And one of the reasons I want to reach out to you is because this is obviously Dolphins time. I mean, we're talking a lot of Heat here, but I mean everybody's kind of curious what the Dolphins are going to do in the draft coming up next Thursday. We're having a huge draft show you're going to be part of. It's going to be streaming on Twitter. We're going to put it on YouTube. We've got more than 20 contributors on it. It's going to be fun. We're going to be, massacring the picks and all the rest of this and arguing and bringing on Jet fans and everybody else. It's going to be a lot more fun than what you see on television. But we're going to be talking about what the Dolphins do. And I was going to write a column, but I was too damn lazy this weekend. I was going to write a column about how at last, and I feel like I've written this column a bunch of times for pretty much every outlet in South Florida, the Dolphins need to emulate the Heat. Like they've had this example just the south of them, and instead of emulating them all these years, it's like they've been jealous of them and tried to go the opposite direction as if to prove that was going to work. And Steve Ross has taken various shots at the Heat over the years. They're not really relevant now that LeBron's not there and all the rest of that stuff. But I feel like now more than ever, and I will give my explanation for this, they need to emulate the Heat. Do you also feel that way? Because when I texted you about this, you said I was thinking about writing that too.
Yes, and I think that now they have the opportunity, but it's going to take success to keep it going, because what always happens here, and it's happened here for 20 years, since Shula was ran out of town, and then you had some kind of continuity with Jimmy Johnson. He even got to pick his successor and Dave Wannstedt. once they blew him out of here, it's been a 4-year period and another 4-year period of completely different philosophies and complete teardowns that allows for no continuity and no real culture to be built. So hopefully now with Brian Flores, he seems to have at least an ethos. He has a philosophy. He knows what he wants on either side of the ball. Hopefully they get some success so they can have some time to build this culture that they keep talking about now.
Well, let's go through it historically, because I do think it might be unfair to say that they've rejected the Heat philosophy in all ways, because I think there have been times where their owners, whether it was Huizenga or more recently Ross, have tried to do some things that the Heat do. And the best examples that I can come up with is that they tried to find their Pat Riley 3 different times, right, since Shula was gone. And I want to go back to talk about Shula, because Shula's departure coincided with Riley's arrival, essentially. And so there was a passing of the torch between one to the other as kind of the patriarch of this town, the executive in charge of everything, who keeps things going. And I know Don was not the general he had a general manager with him, and Joe Thomas and others through the Heckert and others through the years. But essentially, Don was in charge. It was the Dolphins, you thought of Don Shula. The Heat, since you've thought of Pat Riley. But the thing was, Jimmy came in at that same time as Pat, essentially pretty close to the same time, and was supposed to be the Riley there. But his heart wasn't into it like Pat's was. And, if you go to, 96, 97, he started to build the foundation. And then I thought in 98, 99 is where he erred, because he had an opportunity to then, to me, the thing he did really well was 96, 97. He accumulated picks. He hit on Zach late. He hit on JT. He hit on Madison. He hit on, a bunch of other sort of, peripheral guys that were Wooden, Perry, others who were effective guys for him. And then what did they do? He had a chance to kind of move up, take Randy Moss. Didn't do that. We all know what kind of happened, and it went the other way. And then he was more concerned, I thought, with stock trading and with Buttercup, his Yorkie, than he was with the Dolphins. So he wasn't really into it and had to be convinced to stay. Riley's never had to be convinced to stay. In fact, Riley doesn't want to leave, right? So it's been the opposite. But then since then, okay, Wannstedt was kind of he's here, higher. But then, then obviously, we know what happened, Bates, etc. But then they bring in Saban. Yeah. And Saban was supposed to be Riley, and, was sort of the right man in the wrong place, right? And never really warmed to South Florida. His wife didn't warm to South Florida, didn't get the quarterback he should have gotten, didn't think he was going to beat Belichick, didn't like dealing with the media that was going to actually push back on him a little bit, just didn't like players who were going to push back on him, which is why he didn't like the pro game. And so that didn't end up working out. And then, of course, after the Cameron disaster, then they try again with Parcells to find their Riley, who to me was in the media's eyes, is the carbon copy of Riley, but not really, right? Yeah. Like, New York background, or at least, New York, a history in New York of success, being able to deal with the media, set up an apparatus, bring in quality people under him. But he basically checked out before he got here and proved to be pretty fraudulent and made a lot of the wrong moves. And so you had Jimmy, Saban, Parcells. Now, since Parcells, Sperano, etc., then you had Philbin, and you had, you had missteps with Gase and etc. Do you think, just from the Dolphins' perspective, because I know you follow the Heat, but you closely, but you follow the Dolphins more closely. Do you think that they've learned anything over the years from what's gone on in Miami, or do you think that it's just been sort of, it has seemed a lot of times, like I said at the top of the show, like jealousy that they've had towards the Heat, where it's like they don't totally want to embrace what was going on to the South?
Well, I think that the guy that has to learn is Stephen Ross, because he's the one who hires and fires. And I believe that, I wouldn't say that he's completely, and he won't admit to it, that he's completely emulating the Heat, but he kind of is in one respect. They have sold themselves completely on this new philosophy, and they're building around what Brian Flores wants. And what Brian Flores wants, he seems to be getting his way all throughout, at least this first year in the process, because everything that they've done as far as roster building has been under what, the cookie cutter New England Patriot way, sort of say. And to the point where they actually brought in Kyle Van Noy, who's probably going to be the captain of the defense now, who was a guy that Brian Flores identified with, was friends with in New England. And they went so far as to now invest somewhere close to 21% of their salary cap into the defensive backfield, which is a Brian Flores specialty. So you could see that he is getting his way all throughout this process. So they're buying into a philosophy and they're sticking to it.
So is Flores, because we talk about culture, and there was a lot of this borrowing of the phrase culture, right? I know it's not just a Heat phrase, but locally it's associated with the Heat because they've had one and the Dolphins have not. So is if I was to say to you, is Grier the Riley of the Dolphin organization? It sounds like Chris Grier, the general manager. It sounds to me like Flores is the Riley of the Dolphin organization now, right? Like, I mean, even though Grier is the one technically making the draft picks, it's really Flores that's setting the philosophy.
Yes, it's backwards. For many, many years here, the media has been has been repeating the same mantra. Go get the guy that hires the coach and then hires this guy and hires, get the Riley type. Well, that's not what they actually did here. They already had a GM here. They went out and they hired a guy who, and I said it when I think we were at a lunch meeting, and I said, this guy's going to get his own team soon, Marvin Allen. They got him out of the Buffalo Bills. This is a guy that will be general manager in the NFL very, very soon. Somehow he took the job here. I'm guessing he took the job here because he was given extra responsibility. So it'll be his draft board in a week. And then they got the coach afterwards. And the coach seems to be hired through Stephen Ross in consultation with Chris Grier, because Chris Grier seems to have some type of relationship with Brian Flores. But as soon as that happened and Brian Flores got the job, it seems like Brian Flores is the one that's setting the direction for this franchise and not the other way around. So I think what Brian Flores asked for is what Chris Grier and Marvin Allen will go get for him.
And again, this was done with Flores earning respect last year from the organization, from the players, and from the fans, which is more challenging in some ways than what Riley had to do here, because Riley already had that. Like, I mean, when Pat arrived, the Lakers, I mean, there were rings. The Knicks, that was a miraculous job he did there. Like, if you look at what's happened there since, think about it. Like, I mean, he stitched together a team. Yes, he had Ewing, but he stitched together a team with, Anthony Mason and John Starks, right? Like two guys nobody wanted. One of them was stacking groceries, basically.
Yeah, and
right?
it shouldn't be lost that Brian Flores got his start as a personnel guy with the
Correct.
New England Patriots.
So there is some things, and one of the things we're going to do on this particular podcast is I want to go through the things that you think that if it's going to be Flores, things he can learn from Pat, because I think that is really instructive here. I have one big thing, and it doesn't really have anything to do with coaching. It has to do more with kind of what you do from a personnel perspective. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you about another great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. You got to check out this podcast. No, it's not a sports podcast, but it certainly applies, to South Florida. It's called Lessons via Leaders, and it's a weekly show where they interview a new entrepreneur, founder, or thought leader every single week. Many of their guests are local leaders here in South Florida that have built huge businesses and fostered large communities and movements. Each show features a new guest that shares with the audience valuable lessons and learnings that they've amassed over their careers. Their shows can be found all the places you can find this show: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. They also have a video version of each episode that they post on YouTube. So check it out. Highly recommend it. I was listening to an episode this weekend. It's called Lessons via Leaders. They've threatened to have me on there. I don't know why they would have me on there, but they're going to have certainly other people that are much more interesting than me. So check that out. All right, so let's talk about leadership now. Let's talk about Riley and what can be learned. And I'll give you one, and then you give me one. Here's the biggest thing that I think the Dolphins can learn from Pat Riley right now. Go big or go home. Go big or go home. Pat Riley has never shied away from the big move down here. And the one time he did, which to me was he made defensive, sentimental, scared moves, was when he signed all those guys after the 16-17 season. when he signed Dion. Look, Tyler Johnson was the year before, okay, and that was more Mickey. Whiteside was the year before, and he was going to be maxed out by somebody else anyway. But I'm talking about the re-signings in particular of James Johnson and Dion Waiters, which were totally uncharacteristic for this organization to pay okay players, okay, regardless of what you thought of Dion and his attitude, but to pay okay players big money on long-term deals when you could develop guys that were just as good. Those were scared moves. They were made in part. Now we can say that it's worked to a certain degree, and something else I want to talk about. It's worked to a certain degree because I think that they were trying to repair relationships with agents and others around the league after what happened with the big three and everybody leaving unhappy. So, okay, we're going to take care of our own, even if these guys have not been here that long, but they did give us 30 and 11. But to me, those were scared moves that were totally uncharacteristic of Pat, and they spent more than 2 years trying to sort of unravel themselves out of it, which they finally did, but it cost them, right? It cost them basically Josh Richardson, because otherwise they could have probably signed Jimmy into space. It cost them, having to take the Ryan Anderson ultimately with Tyler Johnson and having to stretch out his contract. So it cost them, but they did a miraculous job kind of mitigating the damage, so to speak. All right, that is the only time that Pat, in my view, has operated scared. The Dolphins have operated scared for 2 decades, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But the Heat, it's not enough to say Glenn Rice is a really good player, as we've talked about episodes, when Alonzo Mourning is available. It's not enough to say we developed Josh Richardson as a second-round pick and he exceeded expectations and he's a great character guy and he's a great glue guy when Jimmy Butler is available. It's not enough to say we got more out of Lamar Odom than anybody else has gotten out of him before, and we drafted Caron Butler 10 and he was a steal when Shaquille O'Neal is available. It's never been enough for Pat. He's always made the bold move. Why do I bring this up? Because we're having conversations right now about what the Dolphins are going to do with all of these draft picks. I know what Pat would do with them. He'd trade as many as he had to trade to get the one freaking guy he wants. Okay?
Yeah.
And to me, I know that these sports are different. I know that maybe one player can't change a franchise, although I do think in quarterback you can. But do you see any correlation there? And do you see the Dolphins finally? Because Dolphin fans are clinging to these draft picks. We can't give up an extra fourth. We can't give up a future third. Who gives a bleep? Who gives a bleep? Like, you think Riley has always talked about these as chips. Human beings to him are chips. They're pieces to be moved around to get the piece, and then figure it the bleep out later. All right? Get the guy, figure it out later. This is a long-winded way of saying, if you can go up and get Joe Burrow, if you have to go up and get Tua, and it costs you an extra fourth or a fifth or a third or a first, I don't care. I don't care. Get the guy. There'll always be other offensive guards and linebackers. Do you see any correlation there?
Absolutely. And one thing I've always admired about the Heat organization is how they could turn over rocks and find all these guys out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere, and plug them in and be support staff for then the one guy that they go out and get. And that seems to be what they've done with Jimmy Butler. Now, forget about the big three, because that was just, you had the one guy here that they had to re-sign, by the way, and Dwayne Wade. And then they just went and bought 2 superstars to play right next to him. But traditionally, what Pat Riley has always done, and maybe it hasn't always led to championships, is they've turned over rocks to find people. And even though that Knicks team that he took to the finals against the Rockets, that was essentially what the Heat has been doing here for 24 years. Anthony Mason, where did he come from? Where did John Starks come from? Where did Charles Smith, where did he come from? And all those guys were cogs in one major wheel that was pushed along by Pat Riley. And the engine of that team was Patrick Ewing. If they don't have Patrick Ewing, all of that good work, and by the way, if the Heat right now did not have Jimmy Butler, and to a lesser extent, and probably to a bigger extent, Bam Adebayo, all of these great young stars that you found out of nowhere, and that's leading me to the Dolphins, would lead you to where? Maybe the 8th seed, maybe the 9th seed, 10th seed, the lottery again? No, you need that one guy, that Jimmy Butler, that Bam Adebayo, that Patrick Ewing. And in this case, if you got a quarterback, if you go get a quarterback, you are taking a shortcut that many other teams take. but you're doing it by just using one draft pick, and you could probably do it by just sitting there at number 5, taking your guy. He works out, and all it cost you was one of 3 first-round picks. That's it.
But even if it costs you more, Alfredo, that's my thing.
Yes.
Like, even if you have to slide up to 3 or 4 and give up a future first, this is the cost. To me, this is one of the things when you talk to people inside the Heat, you'll hear this phrase a lot. They will say, this is the cost of doing business. Okay. Did they want to have to make the transaction for Jimmy the way they made it? No. Like, okay, you had the first thing again. They couldn't take Jimmy into space because they didn't have space. Then they work out a deal with Dallas where they're going to give up Dragic. And look, it turned out to be a good thing they didn't give up Dragic. But then there's some kind of miscommunication, weird deal there with Mark Cuban where they wanted Olynyk and Derek Jones Jr. Oh, so that's blowing up. And it goes public that it's blowing up. I was basically told that what Andy Ellisberg did to make that deal happen was the biggest bit of wizardry that's happened in the NBA in the last 10 years. Okay. I've been told that by a couple of different people who were part of the process. All right. That the way that he turned in, eventually I will get that. I've said this on the pod before. I will get that entire story told. Okay. But they managed to get the Whiteside thing done, which I still don't understand how that happened. They bring in a functional player in Myers Leonard, who's a perfect fit for their quote unquote culture, and who also is on a last year of his contract, so they get an opportunity to evaluate him. And by the way, I want to thank Myers. I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, but our guy Nikias Duncan, his house burned down, and we put out a GoFundMe for him. More than $18,000 was raised in less than 48 hours. And some of that was Myers Leonard. So we just I want a salute to Myers Leonard. It wasn't just his contribution, but him pushing it out there on social media. You should have seen the flood of donations that came in the following hour. So we appreciate that. But getting back to this, you take a look at what happened here. Oh, by the way, we have a Myers Leonard card to give away too. We're going to do that on the next podcast. But so you make that deal, and then you pick up Harkless in that deal, who you wanted to keep. But you couldn't keep him, and you had to give up a first-round pick to grease the wheels with the Clippers to get the deal done. Now, in the end, did you want to do all that? No. Would you have rather kept Harkless? Would you have rather kept the first, so at least maybe you could flip it to somebody else? Yes. But this is the cost of doing business, because once you got Jimmy Butler, a lot of other things start to fall into place. And you mentioned it. You have to get the guy. And that doesn't look. I know the sports are different. In the NFL, you don't want to blow all your money in free agency. It's different. It's different in terms of the way you acquire the players. But the vehicle in the NFL is the draft. And I guess I get back to this with you. Our Dolphin fans, I feel like there's crossover between Dolphin and Heat fans. Okay, there's crossover. I would say it's as Venn diagrams go, it's not perfect. Okay, but there is crossover. There's also a lot of jealousy, resentment from Dolphin fans towards the hardcore Dolphin fans towards the hardcore Heat fans. I have noticed that. There's also I would say there's a difference in terms of what the audience is. Okay. I've talked about this before. Would you agree with this? The Heat audience tends to skew younger, mostly because the success has been more recent. It tends to skew a little bit more diverse. I think it's more, I would say, Black and Latino than the Dolphin audience is. I think the Dolphin audience is more white, so to speak. I'm not saying, again, there's crossover, a lot of crossover, but I'm saying if you're talking about which way it goes. And I also think Dolphin fans, there's a defeatism among Dolphin fans that does not. With Heat fans, there's an internal optimism. Like, even if you're pissed at the Heat, right, there's optimism. With the Dolphins, there's not.
Yeah, no, the Dolphin fan on Twitter, it's stifling sometimes. You can almost suffocate under it. All the woe is me, all hell's breaking loose, and we're going to be terrible forever. Like, I'm usually an optimist. I'm an optimist in life. I like to look at the sunny side of things and at least hope for the best. Heat Twitter is eternally hopeful that Giannis is going to be here in a year, or maybe Anthony Davis this summer. They're always thinking that something good is just around the corner. The Dolphin fan is just waiting for a piano to fall on their head. And I hate it. I just hate it. Because I remember the day when it wasn't like that. I remember the day when everybody was talking Super Bowl every single summer.
But that's been – okay, but I think the last time that's happened was the Culpepper year. I think 2005 with Saban coming in into 2006. when Culpepper came in that year. People, they talk about Breeze, Culpepper. They don't, forget, like the Dolphins were on the cover of Sports Illustrated before Maven destroyed Sports Illustrated, back when SI mattered.
Yeah.
They were on the cover of Sports Illustrated. They were going to the Super Bowl. It was against I
They
don't
were
remember.
picked by Peter King to win the Super Bowl.
To win the Super Bowl. Like that was
the Super Bowl to Seattle, I believe. One of the two.
Right. So that was 2006, and that's really been the last time. And I think if you look at what happened after, again, then the Dolphins were a disaster that year. Saban leaves. The Heat won the championship that year, right before it in 2006. And then you had this sort of shallow dive, afterwards with, the 15-win team, but then Dwayne's rise back up and making them not a contender, but they were a playoff team again. And then obviously the big three come and they totally crowded the Dolphins out of the room. I mean, the Dolphins have not had, the biggest stars for the Dolphins since Marino, okay, who, again, if you're under 30, you don't even, it's YouTube videos for you. So it's Maria. We're Zach and Jason.
Yeah.
And Zach and Jason are dwarfed by LeBron and Dwayne and Bosh. So
from a fan standpoint, although I will say this, from a fan standpoint, that 2008 season and to a lesser extent the 2009 season, those two running backs, Ronnie Brown and Ricky Williams, those were electric moments inside that stadium when they were running the Wildcat, and they had that great rushing attack, and they played those big games against the Jets and against the Ravens. But of course, when they went to the playoffs, they have a home game in the playoffs, and you have a mad, crazy crowd, and of course, you don't give them that extra push to make them fans for life. You get blown out in the first round against a pretty good Ravens team, but nonetheless, you lose at home.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and in the interim, if you look at it, they haven't won a playoff game since December 30th, 2000. So we're talking almost 20 years. And in that time, the Heat have been to 5 finals, won 3 championships, been consistently competitive, had the biggest team in the world for, roughly 4 years, had incredible continuity. And I guess when we come back from the break, there are 2 things I want to get to with you to close. One thing is, we talked about, have they learned any lessons from the Heat? And will they actually go big or go home? And my question on it too is, have they learned in terms of continuity? Because that's really the Heat lesson, which the Dolphins have been kind of caught in between, because it's hard to have continuity when you don't have competence, but they haven't really had either. And so that's the thing. And the other thing, a question I have for you is the one that always gets posed, and I used to argue with others who used to be on our network about this. If the Dolphins ever win, will it be bigger than what the Heat have done? Because there are still Dolphin fans who are clinging to that, and I'm not quite sure that I agree. But anyway, before we get to that, I want to tell you about one of the great sponsors of our network, and that's the Seltzer Mayberg Law Firm. You can find them at onecalllegal.com. Spell it out, O-N-E, calllegal.com. They are still working. So if you have a legal issue, and I know for some people legal issues are kind of piling up right now, make sure that you check out onecalllegal.com. They've got someone there 24 hours a day on the website. Like I said, their attorneys are all working remote. They're popping in and out of the office. We actually work in that office from time to time. I'm going to check it out again this week. So it is open, and they are handling cases. So I know that the courts are closed here in Broward and in Dade, but stuff is still going on. You can still get that preparation that you need. Like I said, they handle just about everything. They handle personal injury. They handle traffic tickets. They handle immigration. They handle sports law. They handle contract law. So make sure to check it out. It's the Seltzer Mayberg Law Firm at onecalllegal.com. All right, so those are the 2 questions as we close here, Alfredo, I'm posing. Do you think that they will finally achieve continuity here? Because I feel like they've tried. They didn't want Saban to leave. They didn't really want Jimmy to leave. They didn't expect Parcells to leave. But nobody has wanted to stay, or nobody has done a good enough job to stay. And then in some cases, like with Joe Philbin, they may have stayed with him too long because they were trying to create continuity. Do you think that Brian Flores, he's got a 5-year deal, is he going to get the time to make this thing work?
Well, we know how we get continuity in the NFL, right? Like, you're either New England and you win everything for 20 years, or you're John Harbaugh and you're constantly in an AFC championship game or winning the division or have an exciting team like this past year and always in the playoff mix, or you're Mike Tomlin, who has had one under 500 season his entire career there in Pittsburgh. So there's one thing that's consistent with all three of those guys, and those are the only ones that I don't know. Maybe I'm missing somebody, but those are the only three guys that I can think of that can say, okay, we have some continuity here with this franchise. And the one thing that's consistent with all three is that they constantly win. They're always winning. They're always in the playoff hunt. They're always at 9, 10,
but is it
11
chicken
wins.
or is it chicken or the egg? Because we talk about, look, the Spurs had a little bit of a down year this year, but basically in the NBA, it's been the Heat, it's been the Spurs. I feel like the Raptors are starting to get a little bit of that as long as Masai stays. It
used to be the Dallas Mavericks.
It was the Dallas Mavericks. Well, it is from a coaching perspective, and I do think that one of the reasons they dug themselves out, obviously they got very fortunate that Luka was still there for them, and they made the right choice. But is that Rick Carlisle's still there? He and Spo are basically, they're 4 days apart. They're basically tied for second in terms of Spo was technically second, but in terms of longest tenured coach with a particular franchise. So it's worked for them. I do think Dallas fits into that category. But if you look at in the NFL, it's basically been the ones that you've mentioned. It's a little of both, right? Like it's chicken and it's the egg, right? Like because the winning allows you to stay, but the staying allows you to win, or at least lose for less time, right? And dig yourself out of it. So I feel like they want Flores to be the guy. Like they want him. No, my question is more if Grier will be the guy. Like I feel like if someone was to say to me in 3 years, one of these two guys is here, Chris Grier or Brian Flores, I would take Flores. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I believe that Flores eventually will be the guy that can hire or fire a new general manager, much like Belichick. Maybe he didn't fire Scott Pioli, but he kind of nudged them out of the way because they had some disagreement. Like nobody ever hears about all the front office, people that they have in New England because they know that Bill Belichick's in charge.
Right.
I think that's kind of the model they're going for here. Although, they put Chris Grier out in front with Marvin Allen. I think eventually if Flores can string together a few 10-6, 11-5 seasons, I think you'll slowly see that those guys actually work for him. Now, so far, like, what's the evidence? The evidence is that they kind of are working for him because they're going out and building a team by his specifications.
Right. Yeah, and I just there's just a lot of Flores's his presentation is different from Pat's. There's not as much bluster, but there's similarities in terms of approach, I think, between the two of them. Although Pat would never have a no talent wall, like that's not a bad thing, but there are similarities between the two of them, and I think there is similarity in terms of getting the guys who are going to fit the culture, and if they don't,
and practice,
they're going to get rid of. And the practices, I think the speed of their Pat again. The Heat have morphed a little bit in that regard. I mean, Spo's not running Riley practices. They don't even have There were hardly any shoot-arounds this year. Now, part of that was to avoid the media, but the Heat hardly had any shoot-arounds. They were running walkthroughs that there was no media availability basically before the game. All right, so let's get to the last piece of this because this is an interesting part of this. And I feel like, again, I was talking about the demographic differences between the two fan bases and sort of the jealousy. And if you tell a hardcore Dolphin fan that this is a basketball town now, you will get a virulent reaction. And then you'll start to hear, well, as soon as the Dolphins get to a Super Bowl, you'll see that the Heat's championships won't mean anything. And I'm like, okay, can you win a playoff game first? And to me, that's part of the point. Like, I mean, there's this speculation about what this town would be, but I don't see anybody wearing Dolphin shirts. Like if you go around town and you just, when we used to be able to drive and leave the house, and you check out what's on people's cars, all right, all the license plates are Heat plates. Like they're all Heat plates. There's no Dolphin plates. I'm between Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade. I'm all over the damn place, east, west, etc. And I see all Heat plates. Anybody under 20 is wearing Heat shirts, okay? Heat jerseys, associates with Wade. Like I mentioned, Marino retired 20 years ago. And his last great season was what? Before the Achilles? I mean, maybe 91, maybe 92.
Oh, he was great in 95 when
Okay,
he came back.
95 he was great. You're right. I mean, they didn't make the playoffs though, and then Shula got run out. But right, that was another of the teams that was supposed to win a championship. They had like 22 first-round picks on that team, like everybody, Steve Entman and everybody else. But there's no association with Dan from somebody who's under 30 at this stage. So I mean, do you think? I mean, if the Dolphins build with something, I think it's going to have to. It's not just it's football and everybody's going to respond to football. It has to be done with panache. It has to be done with a star, with a face,
with a personality.
Yeah. With a personality. The 08 team, and I covered that team home and road. I was at all 16 games. I was in the locker room in the Meadowlands when they beat Favre and won. Okay, and Pennington and Joey Porter. It was a great story. But there was JT wasn't even on that team. I mean, no. it was right. It wasn't. And Chad Pennington, one of the classiest people I've ever covered, but was, he was a rental. I mean,
and he was an MVP candidate that year, and everybody forgets.
Everybody forgets he was top 3. But he's, I mean, but you're not putting Chad Pennington as a rental from the Jets. He was still associated with the Jets for a lot of people on a bunch of billboards. Yeah. To me, that's another reason. Like, if that's ever going to happen, it has to be with a star. Like, everybody's got to be wearing that Tua jersey down here. With Wade gone, okay, and maybe the Heat don't get to the finals in the next couple of years. That's the only way that this happens. Do you think it's as simple as Dolphins win, this is a football town again?
Well, I love looking at examples across the nation, and there's 2 that I find fascinating. And one of them is the greater New England area, Boston. You would think, man, they got the Bruins, they got the Red Sox, they got the Celtics. But look at their TV numbers. Their TV numbers for the Celtics are consistent with the best TV numbers of any basketball team in the NBA. Okay, any of the, the big, let's say, big 5 or 6 markets. Their football team, the Patriots, of course, they win everything, but they get 33 shares for Sundays. Okay, that means that 1 out of every 3 TVs is watching the Patriot game. Those are Super Bowl numbers. Okay, then you come down here to Miami, and a regular Dolphin game on a Sunday is going to pull somewhere around a 9 or an 8, which is equivalent to what a Heat regular season game might get. But then you go out west to Los Angeles, and they have teams like the Rams and the Chargers, although nobody cares about the Chargers. I think nobody knows that they were in Los Angeles this past year. But you go out there, and it's the other way around. Everybody cares about the Lakers. The Lakers get 3 times the numbers. So what's consistent here is whoever's winning at the time seems to get the eyeballs at that particular moment. I think as long as the Heat stays championship relevant, and I believe that they're championship relevant right now, because I have a different definition of what I consider championship relevant. Nobody thinks that they're going to go out and beat the Clippers or the Lakers in the finals this year, if we have a finals. But if you are threatening for the Eastern Conference Finals, that's a championship. So you are championship relevant, even if you get blown out of Milwaukee in 4 games. As long as the Heat stay right there, I think this is a 50-50 town if the Dolphins are good. If not, I think that the Dolphins, if they remain bad, they continue losing ground every single year, and I think they'll threaten to go below Heat regular season numbers, and which is strange to say, but it would be one of the few markets anywhere in the United States.
Well, but they should be higher just by the scarcity of them. All right, I mean that's been one of my points, is that they should be considerably higher. Because there's only 16, there's not 82.
Yeah, and the Dolphins have a built-in advantage, which is the NFL. Everybody loves the NFL.
Exactly, but and that's why I don't think it's as easy as flipping a switch. Would people get into it? Absolutely. But I mean, you mentioned Boston, and I look, but for the Patriots to do that, it took 2 decades of winning
9 Super Bowl appearances and 6 titles.
Right, but as soon as, if that, to me, I don't think that's permanent up there. I mean, that's a Red Sox and Celtics place, and
I think it's going to flip. I think it's going to flip as soon as they start losing.
As soon as they start losing, I don't think. Whereas the Red Sox and the Celtics have maintained, and they've both had bad years, bad times. I mean, the Red Sox had bad century. I mean, the Celtics. We can talk about all the championships, but I mean, there was also a lot of ML Carr coaching in there, and there was some where Antoine Walker was the best player on the team for a little bit. Like there were some bad teams, and yet the Celtics maintained a relevance. Now I think it gets overblown because there are some empty seats in that place, until they got the last 3-4 years, they've been good enough again, even after Pierce and everybody else kind of exited the stage. But that, I don't think that remains a football town up there, because it's not really a football. New England is not really a football market as much. It's just that they've done so much damn winning, and there's no college football up there of any relevance. And so, you don't have that. I mean, football is going to dominate in SEC country. Football is going to dominate in Dallas. Football is going to dominate in some of those markets, but it doesn't necessarily dominate in the other places. I mean, there's
even then the Mavericks. Very few people know this. You know who has the longest sellout streak in the NBA?
Dallas. No, Dallas has done exceptionally well.
Chicago's number 1, but Dallas is number 2, and it's by far.
It's because they've built, and that was a moribund franchise before. That was one of the joke franchises of the NBA before Cuban bought it. You take a look at other ones. I mean, Phoenix has been bad forever now with Sarver's ownership, but that has always been more of a, that town has always trended towards basketball more if the team is good. And I think you can find others. I mean, no, Denver, no. Okay, it's a football market.
LA ignores the football teams.
LA ignores the football teams, and I think
everybody's into the Lakers and now the Clippers.
Right. So I don't necessarily agree with people who think that the Heat thing goes away. The Heat thing didn't go away when LeBron left. If it was going to go away, it was going to go then. I think bringing Dwayne back into the fold, repairing things with Dwayne, I think emphasized again the bond that franchise has built. And it is because everybody knows the names, not just the names of the players. They know the names of everybody in that damn front office. They know the names of the scouts. They know the names of, everybody. They know the names of the trainers. They know everybody because everybody has been here for so long. That, to me, more than the championships, is going to be Pat's legacy here. It is this sustained, and Mickey to a degree as well. It's just this is the continuity, the connection with the town, where the Dolphins just don't have that. When we had the Fish Tank podcast in our network, one of the things that I talked about was it was going to be a challenge for them, because they were telling these great stories about all these, former Dolphin players, but there's like 10 years where there's just nobody you want to hear from. I mean, like there's the Wannstedt years, and then, okay, after that, a couple of the Saban years, and then, okay, if you get Chad Pennington on the show, and then it's like, okay, Carlos Dansby, like who are we getting that made an impact over like an 8 to 10 year period? It's just a totally forgettable era. The Heat have never had a forgettable era since Pat came. They've had maybe a forgettable year, like 2002, 2003, okay, where it was like a bunch of guys on 1-year contracts, like a Kendall Gill and a Cedric Ceballos and a Jimmy Jackson and a Travis Best, but they haven't had a forgettable era. I mean, they haven't had forgettable 2 years. And so, I mean, 14, 15, we don't really remember with Henry Walker taking shots late in the game, but the next year they should have made the Eastern Conference Finals and would have probably if Whiteside and Bosch had been healthy. So anyway, it's an interesting discussion. We'll close here. Obviously, you got to check out the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast. These guys have been nailing the draft picks for the last couple of years. They'll nail them again this year. I'll ask you, do you think that they will make the bold move and get the quarterback in the first 10 picks one way or another? And who will that quarterback be?
Yes, I think they will. I think that quarterback will be Tua Tagovailoa. If somehow, some way, Detroit, let's say, wants him and takes him, I think they will trade down, and it won't be Herbert. It will be Jordan Love. But yes, who they will get, Tua Tagovailoa. They'll move up probably to 3, and it'll cost them maybe that 26th pick to move up to 3.
And if they do that, to me, Tua should take we talk about numbers. He ain't taking 13. Nobody over 13 years old thinks he's taking 13.
He already did an interview, and he said that
he'll take 11. Right, which is Devontae Parker's number. But
yes.
to me, why not wear the number that's associated with this town now? Take 3.
Yes.
Take 3. All right. And then you'll have a lot of people who wore the 3 for the Heat who will associate the one with the Dolphins. I also think 1 is an interesting number that you could take, as a quarterback number. To me, it all starts with the quarterback. Take 1, but I would take 3, man. Like, it's not look, the Heat retired 13, but the Dolphins haven't retired 3. And even though the Heat retired 13, Mike Miller wore it anyway. So, and Bam Adebayo is wearing it proudly now. So you can pull it down. Anyway, check out Alfredo Arteaga at Alf _Arteaga. and also the 3 yards per carry pod. Alf, thanks for doing this.
No, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Five on the Floor on the Five Regional Sports Network.